Russia thought for 3 days and nights. He could not understand. Why did Germany dare to attack the Soviet Union? Whether looking back from 1941, attacking the Soviet Union was a bad move for Germany. The problems in the West were not yet resolved. Germany was still fighting Britain across the sea. Italy was once again surrendering. Honestly, this was truly reputation. The West was still unstable. Why would Germany attack the Soviet Union? In 1941, when Germany launched Operation Barbarossa, it had been less than 2 years since the signing of the Non-Aggression Pact. In fact, there was no choice in this matter. If Hitler did not attack the Soviet Union, the Soviet Union would soon attack him. As they say, if given a choice, Hitler would prefer to be a good person. This all began with World War I. After World War I ended in 1919, Germany, as a defeated nation, signed the Treaty of Versailles. Germany was to pay reparations of 226 billion marks. It also had to cede 1/8 of its territory and population. The Ruhr industrial region was occupied by France and Belgium. Germany lost all its overseas colonies. A defeated nation, lost territory, and an emperor gone. The military retreated. The burden of an era fell on individuals. It was a heavy weight. At that time, it took 500,000 marks to buy a loaf of bread. Such money could not fit in a cart. While World War I veterans fought on the front lines in France, the representatives of the Weimar Republic were at the negotiation table. The defeat in World War I imposed huge war debts on Germany. It also cost Germany all its colonies and 13% of its territory. This meant a loss of 6.5 million people. It also limited Germany's military strength. Germany could not have more than 100,000 troops. This was a severe blow to a traditional land power. At that time, the Allies were blockading Germany and the emerging Soviet Union. Surprisingly, this led to a tacit alliance between Germany and the Soviet Union. In April of that year, the Weimar Republic signed the Rapallo Treaty with the Soviet Union. Both sides waived reparations and territorial claims from World War I. They began cooperation in armored vehicles, military aircraft, and chemical weapons. Germany even established military schools and conducted exercises in Soviet territory. Germany was the first major power to recognize the Soviet Union. At that time, Germany was under the supervision of the Versailles Treaty. Independent development in these fields became impossible. The Soviet Union, lagging in these areas, gained urgently needed military technology. Germany could secretly develop military technology. After all, the British and French could not supervise them in Soviet territory. Although initially, Germany and the Soviet Union had a brotherly relationship. This changed with the rise of the Nazi Party. After Hitler came to power, all cooperation with the Soviet Union, except for armored units, ceased. At that time, fundamental ideological differences existed. The Soviet Union emphasized collective experience for the majority, while Germany focused on the superior group. This was the Nazi racial ideology. The Nazis had a fierce conflict with the German communists. On February 27, 1933, the Nazis staged the Reichstag fire and blamed it on the German communists. They then enacted the emergency decree for the protection of people and state, banning the activities of the German communists and social democrats in the name of anti-terrorism. Thousands of leftists were arrested. Subsequently, the Nazis granted Hitler dictatorial powers. Then, they prohibited the establishment of a democratic regime. Hitler wrote extensively about attacking the Soviet Union in Mein Kampf, deepening the belief among the aristocrats and World War I veterans. Germany had to seize living resources from the Soviet Union. If Germany's sword was against its enemies, it aimed to acquire land. This was for the sustenance of the German people. Beyond ideological rhetoric, Britain and France had a tacit approval of Germany's military expansion. They hoped to use Nazi Germany to strike east. They wanted it to be a tool to destroy the Soviet Union. The British and French capitalists were not fools. Compared to Germany, the Soviet Union posed a greater threat. After all, if the Germans came, they would only change from British and French capitalists to German capitalists. But if the Soviets came, they would face a much harsher reality. Moreover, attacking the Soviet Union would provide Germany with great practical benefits. The Versailles Treaty did not systematically destroy Germany's industrial system. Instead, it dismembered the Eastern Austro-Hungarian Empire and Tsarist Russia, removing obstacles for Germany's future eastward expansion. On the other hand, Germany's lack of resources increased its interest in the Soviet Union. Throughout World War II, Germany heavily relied on Romanian oil fields. However, these were insufficient. Thus, lacking oil, Germany had great ambitions for the Caucasus oil fields. The German military's blitzkrieg was essentially a risky military gamble. Due to a lack of oil, the German military had to concentrate its limited resources for surprise attacks. This was necessary to defeat their opponents. In the later stages, Germany could not sustain a prolonged war against Japan through sheer force. The so-called military miracle of Blitzkrieg in Germany was essentially a battle of economic efficiency. Without sufficient oil, Germany was destined to lose the entire war. On September 1, 1939, Germany invaded Poland. Afterward, Germany calculated the costs. The invasion of Poland was initially expected to consume 500,000 tons of oil. However, the Blitzkrieg was remarkably successful, only using 100,000 tons. Poland was quickly subdued. Additionally, Germany seized some of Poland's oil reserves. At this point, Germany became emboldened. Germany then turned westward to attack France, Belgium, Luxembourg, and other Western European countries. It was expected to require 1,500,000 tons of oil. But the Blitzkrieg was again very successful, defeating France and occupying 7 Western European countries. Only consumed less than 500,000 tons. Germany performed impressively. Not only were oil reserves preserved, but they also captured over 8 million tons of oil. This was a significant foundation for Germany's war against the Soviet Union. Without this oil, Germany would not dare to attack the Soviet Union. Beyond ideology and resources, Germany and the Soviet Union had irreconcilable geopolitical conflicts. The Baltic states were key strategic areas contested by Germany and the Soviet Union. The core reason was simple. There were deep-water ports. Germany needed safer naval bases to secure iron ore imports from Sweden. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union needed a powerful Baltic fleet. At that time, the Soviet Union was at a low point in strength. As Hitler said before attacking the Soviet Union, it was like a dilapidated house. A single kick from Germany would cause it to collapse. The Soviet Union had just finished the Great Purge. Most Soviet military district commanders, 90% of deputy commanders and chiefs of staff, 80% of commanders, and 1/3 of regiment leaders had been eliminated. Many junior and mid-level officers suffered severe losses. At that time, the core strength of the Soviet army was composed mostly of recent military academy graduates. In early 1941, only 7.1% of Soviet soldiers had received higher military education. 55.9% had received intermediate education, and 24.6% graduated from a crash course. The rest had received no education at all. Even in the 1939 Winter War, 120,000 Soviet troops, despite overwhelming advantages, were heavily defeated by less than 200,000 Finnish soldiers. The casualty exchange ratio was nearly 1-to-1. Although the Soviet Union ultimately suffered over 300,000 casualties, the performance against Finland was quite poor. Germany also realized that if it did not attack the Soviet Union now, the Soviet Union would soon collapse. In 1940, the Soviet army had advanced to the confluence of the Danube and Prut rivers. Romania's core oil fields were just 180 kilometers away. This meant that Romania's oil was also under Stalin's threat. In a few years, even if Germany did not execute Operation Barbarossa, the Soviet Union would have to launch its own operation to attack Germany. Adding to this were ideological conflicts, the British and French policies to utilize oil resources, geopolitical competition, and the apparent weakening of the Soviet Union ultimately led Germany to decide to invade the Soviet Union. However, launching a blitzkrieg against the Soviet Union was inherently disadvantageous for Germany. The blitzkrieg relied on a highway network for rapid troop deployment. However, in Western Soviet territory near Germany, there were vast collective farms in Ukraine and inadequate roads left over from the Tsarist era. Moreover, Germany's railway systems differed from those of the Soviet Union. In the short term, Germany could not use the Soviet railway network in occupied areas. Being backward would typically lead to defeat. But who could have imagined that being behind would allow for a slightly lighter beating? At the beginning, the German army won every battle, but gradually lost irreplaceable veterans. The Soviet army lost every battle, but learned new lessons. Countless Soviet soldiers continued to fight, and the balance of war gradually tilted towards the Soviet Union. Once Germany became mired in a war of attrition with the Soviet Union, Germany's defeat was inevitable. Even if Germany occupied half of Europe, it could not outlast the Soviet Union, which had 1/6 of the world's land area. However, with the Soviet Union's involvement, the United States, acting as a merchant on both sides, would also seek opportunities to profit. This will be the content of the next video. Finally, if you like this video, please like and subscribe. That way, you'll receive updates as soon as they are available.